And our gospel lesson this morning on this Epiphany Sunday is the story of the visit of the Magi. I invite us, as you're able, to please stand as we honor the reading of the gospel. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, 'And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel.'" Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. Before we begin with the message this morning at the start of this new year, I want to invite you, we do this every so often, I'll throw out a question and invite you to turn to a few people around you and discuss it. So on this first Sunday of the new year, I want to ask you this question: what is one thing you need more of in your life, in this season of your life now, and what is one thing you need less of? As you approach this new year, what's one thing you need more of and one thing you need less of? Okay? Join with maybe 2 or 3 or 4 people around you. If you don't know the people around you, make sure you introduce yourselves. And you have 90 seconds, and go. Okay, time's up. If anybody want to, feel free to share one thing they need more of in their life, one thing they need less of as we approach this new year. Yes, Jim? Peace. Okay, more peace?
Time with my granddaughter.
Time with your granddaughter. What else? Yes?
Sandra and I sort of had the same idea. Patience, that when we lay it down to God, pick it back up, because that causes us to worry.
Right. More patience.
Less worry.
More patience, less worry. All right, any others? I think coming out of the Christmas season, really going back to the Thanksgiving, one of the things that's on my list is more self-control and less calories. So, today we celebrate the Epiphany, the story of the arrival of the Magi, or the wise men. Traditionally, the church calls this the Epiphany Sunday. And Epiphany is a word that simply means a divine revealing or a divine manifestation. And it celebrates the fact and marks the arrival of the wise men. This strange visit from these strangers when Jesus was somewhere maybe about a year or 2 old, a year or 2 years old. Now, we might imagine Mary and Joseph, although Joseph is not mentioned in this chapter, but we might just imagine Mary and Joseph on that night of the visit, just sitting around their house. Maybe Mary was catching up with some reading. Joseph was on the couch, channel surfing. There was nothing to watch on TV except, It's a Wonderful Life marathons. Maybe the toddler Jesus was on the floor playing with Legos or blocks, and all of a sudden there's a knock on the door, and in walk these strangely dressed visitors, unannounced, unexpected. These were definitely foreigners with thick accents, and they tell the bewildered parents how for the past year or so they have been tracking a star and reading horoscopes and tarot cards, and how one star in particular has caught their eye and has been leading them to their house. Among other writings, they have been studying the Hebrew Scriptures, and they believe that this child will be a significant person in the world. They even brought gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. We don't know if Jesus left his toys to examine these strange treasures. They present their gifts, and they are so overwhelmed with joy, they pay homage to him. They fall, they kneel before him. There's some pretty interesting twists in this seemingly benign, innocent story of how the good news of the Christ child is unleashed upon the world. God is revealed to Israel through Mary and Joseph, and to the rest of the world, to the Gentile nations, through the Magi. God has bypassed the traditional means of power and ignored the chain of command. God does not show up at the temple, does not notify the religious leaders, the scholars, the priests, the theologians. God does not show up at the royal palace to give a heads up to Caesar or to have an audience with the king. No, the good news is revealed to Magi, to pagan men who study what we call superstition. They read horoscopes. These were people who were not from proper places of power, like Jerusalem or Rome. They were from the east, from Persia, better known today as the area of around Iraq or Iran. The Magi were not people from chosen Israel. They were not well versed in the Hebrew Scriptures. Like some modern-day folks, they read a little bit of the Bible, but they also read books on manifesting your dreams, as well as books on the zodiac signs. These were people who practiced things that were condemned in the Hebrew Scriptures. And yet here they are, waltzing into the Christmas story with their strange ways. They mistakenly arrive in Jerusalem because they think they have come across a snippet from Isaiah in which the prophet says, a king will be born who will bring peace and prosperity, and nations will honor him with gold and frankincense. So naturally, they arrive in Jerusalem because a metropolis is where a person of great influence is born. There they encounter Herod, the current king, who is upset by these strange seekers. In a panic, he goes to his Jewish scribes and the chief priests, and he says, "What is the deal with Isaiah 60? I've got these men stinking up my palace with their spices and their incense and their camels, telling me that Isaiah says that there's a new king that has been born." And the scholars cautiously tell Herod, well, yeah, there's some vague prophecies about a king being born, but those magi, they're looking in the wrong text. That's Isaiah 60 they're looking at, apparently, a wrong text. The prophet Micah says that a new king will be born, not in Jerusalem, but in Bethlehem. So Herod goes back to the wise men and unwittingly tells them the truth. He corrects their bad coordinates and tells them to go to Bethlehem on the condition that they would return and tell him where they have found the child so that he can go and pay his respects. Matthew, the most Jewish of the Gospels, with more references to the Hebrew Scriptures than the others, begins his Gospel with outsiders getting to God first. Part of the challenge of this text is that we envision this visit of the wise men, these magi, through the lens of our favorite children's pageants or our church nativity scenes, with glad tidings of comfort and joy, the singing of silent night, where all is calm and all is bright. But let us note that Matthew's Christmas story is at first very unsettling. It's disturbing to people in power, to the lords of the empire. Matthew says when Herod gets the news that there's a new king in town, he was frightened, disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. A new king meant there was competition. An upstart would be vying for Herod's throne. Herod ruled by absolute, brutal force and control. The Magi's news did not bring comfort and joy. They brought disruption and fear. In Bronxville, New York, every Christmas Eve, there is an annual tradition that has grown into quite a spectacle. Every year at a particular church, a church offers a live nativity. It has grown into quite an event with elaborate costumes and sheep and cows and a camel or two assembled on the church lawn. The characters in the pageant all gather in the church's fellowship hall and wait for their cues before they head out across the lawn to take their place with the manger scene by the roadside. One particular year, the wise men were not only in their silken robes and their fancy turbans, but they had also borrowed censers, these incense carriers, from the local Orthodox church. And so they lit them there in the fellowship hall, and so as they headed across the lawn, they would be shrouded in the smoke, a cloud of mystery and the aroma of incense. They lit their censers in the fellowship hall and left, unaware that they had set off the smoke alarms, which was sending a message to the local fire station in town. And so the nearby fire station responded by sending a couple of fire trucks and fire personnel. It was quite a spectacle that Christmas Eve, because there on the front lawn of the church were not only Mary and Joseph and shepherds and angels and wise men, but there were also lots of firefighters in yellow slickers, unrolling hoses, trying to find out where they're to put out the fire. Finally, when everybody figured out what was going on and how there was no fire, the fire chief yelled, "You wise men are setting off alarms all over town." How true of the original wise men as well. They too set off alarms all over town, because in the newborn Christ, God was doing something new. God was beginning this repairing of the creation, reconciling, making all things new. But God wasn't using the status quo. Isn't it amazing how God uses unlikely people and unlikely places to change the world? This is the story of the good news. It's my story, it's your story. God chooses to reveal himself to us, even to us. The good news did not come first to the empire. It came to a backwater town. The light did not come to the already enlightened. It came to a people who walked in darkness. The good news did not come to the well-versed, to the morally pure. It rested upon those who would receive it, regardless of their life situation or their circumstances or their past or their present. One theologian notes how Herod's scribes knew the Scriptures, knew exactly where the Messiah was. They knew the Scriptures better than anyone, and yet they remained literally unmoved. They stayed stuck in Jerusalem. One preacher has observed that Matthew's Christmas story suggests that you can be right about the Bible and still miss the point. The theologically correct, the biblically astute experts stay put, maybe out of fear, maybe out of caution. But the Magi are moved, maybe out of joy, maybe out of a sense of awe and wonder and mystery. They present themselves and their gifts to a king before he is even coronated and before even knowing what this king will do. The Magi worship the Christ child, not because by worshiping him and encountering him and being in his presence, they now understand everything, they get it. No, they worship because somehow, some way, they have been drawn into a deep presence and into a story that redefines them. They go back home, but not the way they came. Matthew says they go home by another way. Encountering the Christ child did not give them all the answers, but it gave them a new direction. The Magi were simply going on a rumor, a misreading of Scripture, and yet they were moved to take this journey, these seekers. Perhaps like some of us, or many of us gathered here, seeking, searching, maybe not knowing as much as the Bible as we ought to, maybe not knowing the words and the melodies of some of the hymns, maybe not fully understanding or knowing how to explain the Trinity or the Incarnation or the virgin birth, and yet you are here. And somehow, by God's grace, that in itself is enough to get you home. Thanks be to God. Amen.